So, tell me about the thing that makes you most uncomfortable about doing a podcast. I mean, you seem so poised, and you
Well, thank you.
But is the smile the part that indicates when you're uncomfortable?
Maybe sometimes. I think I don't tend to talk about myself.
Yeah.
I think part of what got me here was I was at the Thorns and Roses poetry reading and film screening, and that's where I met some folks who were connected to this, and I was selling my art for the first time.
Wow.
I never sell my art, but I was doing it to support an organization, Cora Center. And so I think talking about myself, putting myself out there, is just not something that I tend to do. But here I am.
Hey, thank you very much. Well,
Thanks for having me.
in this exciting episode of Black Beat Podcast, we are joined by Sonja Ervin. She, her, the Equity and Inclusion Manager at Multnomah County Library. Now, that's a rare one for me. With over 2 decades of experience in community development, which we have something in common on that one. That's fascinating, yeah. And a cultural advocate in inclusion efforts, Sonja is a true leader in Portland's equity work. In addition to her professional role, she is also an artist who donates her artwork to support youth programs. And we'll discuss her work at the library if she's open to discussing that today. Her past roles at Central City Concerns and the role of art in empowering and uplifting young people. So y'all need to tune in to Sonja's inspiring journey, her vision to community-driven equity, and how her passion for art and advocacy intersect to make a difference in Portland and beyond. Sonja, welcome.
Thank you. And can I just clarify? So my artwork that I do, it's not specifically for youth, and I wasn't selling it or donating it specifically for youth.
Yeah.
So I want to clarify that.
My thing is, I just need to get to the fact that you're an artist, and you got some exciting
I am
things.
an artist.
You've arrived, quite a powerful background. Tell us a little bit about who this woman is sitting here in the studio with us today. Take us on that journey. Take that little first step and walk, where you come from, a little bit about your background, yada, yada. How'd you arrive here today?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. My father was in the military, so he was stationed there and retired there. My mom was from Germany, born and raised, and my father met her while he was stationed in Germany. And so I got... as I went through college, I got my degree and my advanced degree in clinical psychology. So I was a licensed psychologist and working in the field of psychology. But most of the work that I've done has been with folks who have been pushed to the margins and are experiencing things like houselessness, mental illness, and addiction. So that's been a lot of the work that I did for the first half of my career. And so I moved here in 2000, and I came to visit. I was visiting a friend. I fell in love with the beauty of it and the nature. I love nature.
Yeah, me too. What got me here.
Yes, it got me here. I had no idea of Oregon's history at that time. It was founded as a white utopia, and so I didn't know that. And so I was working here doing crisis work, mobile mental health crisis work, and then I got pregnant and had my son, and so I was not going to necessarily uproot at that point. So I decided I was going to stay in Portland, and so I worked for Central City. Then moved into the position with Central City, working with folks who had long-term houselessness and mental illness, in a program that we started. That we're working with folks who had failed sort of all of the traditional programs and recognizing that it's not the person that's the problem, right? It's the programs aren't working for them. So I did that for a number of years, and by the work that I did there and working with some culturally specific programs at that organization, along with my son hitting school age and realizing he wasn't getting what he needed. Very, very bright child, very bright young man, and he wasn't getting what he needed in the school system. And I started to recognize the inequities. And so while I've always done equity work sort of not directly, that's when I started moving directly into equity work. And so I did that at Central City Concern for a number of years, and then moved over to the library about 8 years ago, and started doing work with the library.
When you characterize equity work, Sonja, what do you mean when you say equity work?
So equity work, it's actually a number of different paths. The way that I look at it is there's a path where you are working to educate people, to try and bring awareness of things that people with privilege and people with power have that others don't. And how do you use your privilege and power in benefit of those who don't sit in those privileges? Another route is to support people. So people of the global majority, BIPOC folks, brown and black folks, how do we provide supports for them? How do we make sure that they're getting what they need, both physically and emotionally? And then there's the route of policy and process change, right? A lot of our policies and processes and laws are rooted in white supremacy culture. They're rooted in whiteness. That's what this country was founded on. And it continues to play out. So trying to work to shift and sort of chip away at those things so that we can see some improvement moving forward.
Well, I guess, boy, that just like, when I think about what the statements in which you've just made, I think about the road that you've traveled, and I cannot figure out why we haven't met prior to this. It's kind of like, I'm sitting there, I'm looking at this, because you and I have followed similar pathways.
Oh, wow.
I was quite instrumental in writing this state's and the Washington state's drug and alcohol ORs. Right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I've been in the clinical world for quite a long time myself, mental health background.
Wonderful.
I have established many of the drug and alcohol types of programs back in the day, back in the late 90s. And so gang intervention, all of that stuff, wrote a whole lot of,
wow.
And here we are, and
Wonderful.
we have not, and you've been in the field here, I've been in the field here, and here we've met each other. And I don't know about you, but I don't like the fact that to say that I'm old as dirt. But whenever somebody asks me to give them how old I am on the phone, I go, "Shit, I'm that old." Shit.
I'm up there myself. I hear you.
But we wear it well. It's like we season. So, but in light of all the changes and growth, and as I hear you articulate about Oregon, what are some of the growth realities that you've seen since you've been here? I mean, in working with the state and some of these areas around equity and inclusion. But here's a bigger one, I think, as I look back. When I think about equity and inclusion, I think about the things that came before it, right? We talk about civil rights in the beginning, and then this thing came called diversity, right? And now here we are at this other thing called equity. And a lot of people of color don't quite understand the continuum, and most of them recognize something about it, but something wasn't right,
Yeah.
as the end result. Give me a little conversation about that,
Yeah. So I always tell people when I work with people or people reach out about the work and they say we want to diversify, right? Or we want to have a diversity effort. My first instinct is do not diversify. Yeah. Because if you diversify but you have not created an environment of inclusion, if you have not created an environment that is equitable, what you have is you may have brown and black folks in your organization that are going to be really unhappy and won't stay.
Yeah.
So it's really important that you do the work first and get as close as you can. And a lot of that work needs to be driven by asking community what they need, how they need it, right? If you're not a member of that community, you don't know. And if we start making decisions for communities we're not a part of, it can be incredibly damaging.
Yeah.
So I say, the people who own the experience have to lead the process.
Yeah.
And so diversity, I think, is secondary.
Yeah.
Whereas diversity can be easy.
Right.
Inclusion is much more difficult, right? How do we get people to feel like they're part of? How do
Right.
we get people, even if they come to the table, that their voices are actually heard and uplifted?
Right. But that's part of the confusion today, right, as we get to the equity inclusion part, right? But the diversity part and the civil rights part, there was a culmination, all right? My grandfather was the civil rights era, right? And we were familiar about what they were fighting about.
Right.
And what they were driven to try to somehow overturn, change, whatever. And then this diversity part came, and I it's kind of interesting about this. And I remember at the time I was running Marion County's crisis services, and under Children, Family, and Commission, the Family Commission, right? And the white America came to me, and at that time I was doing culturally specific programming, looking at creating programs for culturally specific communities. And they came to me and they said, John, how would you like to join a little bit committee that we have? And what is this committee about? Well, this committee is about diversity. Well, where's this diversity kind of thing coming from? It's a national thing right about now. It's going. So, and I asked, and so they came and they said, well, we believe that if a few other things were able to be allowed on the civil rights platform, that we believe that we can grow this platform and advance it in some different unique ways, and we think that so all these other things, LGBTQ, a different community, we like to put all those things on the platform. And this is just my interpretation of it over the years of watching it grow. And I go, well, reluctantly so, I went along. Well, everybody else in the country went along. Try this. And so all of these other people grew out, and then 25 years later occurred. Most of those opportunities, people who got on that platform advanced in their own particular platform, well, if it's the LGBTQ community, rather if it's the handicapped community, rather if it was other cultures, they all seem to proliferate and launch and go and do something. The state of Black Oregon came out, and we realized that the state of Black Oregon's publishing showed that blacks had not advanced during that time more than 1%, and while everyone else advanced off of the platform. But what was kind of significant, Sonja, for me, was that when the next interim of I don't know what you call them, rather if it's constructs, or when the equity inclusion part came, and I began to hear black men say, that felt like that was a nail in our coffin or something. And so I began to listen a little bit more about what was happening with that part of it. But what I began to see that was unique was that there were a lot of black people sitting at the black table, but not all of the same black people had the same original foundation of the argument of the plight of blacks in America held at heart at that table at that time. Now, sure. I mean, because there are black folks from everywhere in the world that's sitting that have different agendas, different thoughts, and different. So it made that table quite interesting at some point in time. What's your perception of what I just shared with you? I mean, did you see a similar trend of development within that, or was it something different for you?
Well, I think that there are communities. I think communities that are marginalized. Some have made, I think all of them have made movement. Some have made more than others. And I think that there are communities that have made less movement because of the foundation in which we live. So we know anti-blackness is a thing, right? Anti-blackness is a tool of racism.
Yes.
And so a lot of work is done around equity and inclusion. And I think more recently there's this recognition of anti-blackness. And I think this also goes with the with Indigenous communities, right? We know that the disparities for Black and Indigenous communities are much greater than other communities. Right. And so there's been this movement of, okay, we're going to focus on communities of color. And at the same time, we didn't, for a long time, recognize or acknowledge the very real tools of racism that are being used against Black and Indigenous people.
Wow.
And so I think now we are starting to realize, it requires a different approach. It requires, there's an approach called targeted universalism.
Yeah.
And so that means that you have an overarching goal, but how you're going to approach each community is different, because each community needs a different thing, right? Different things, and they need a different approach. Again, needs to be led by those communities. And no community is a monolith, right? So
that's the irony of
you
that,
bring
isn't it?
folks to the table, and you're going to have different experiences and different ways of doing things. So there's no one right way.
Right.
And we have to be open to exploring different ways and hearing from community and seeing what's going to make the biggest impact.
Yeah. And what have you seen over the years, Sonja, those significant things that are impactful? Has there been some significant realizations for you of the things that are impactful at this point?
Can you ask me that? Like, when
is there styles? Is there constructs? Is there modalities that you've come to realize that are things that are working? There are some that you've identified that are some things that are making significant influences. And
I mean, I think one of the significant influences is that people are speaking up more. Well, I think folks always have, but I think the movements that happened with George Floyd, the protests, there really was this verge of a revolution, right? That was going to change the direction that we were going in. People were tired. People were no longer willing to take the status quo. And so I think there's more things where folks are coming together. Folks are speaking up. What I'm finding in Portland there are more spaces that are specific to brown and black folks to come together and do healing and racial healing, right?
Yeah,
We have racial trauma. And so I'm finding a lot more are coming up. So for instance, Cora Center, which is where I was selling my art for, that is a BIPOC owned and started psilocybin center.
Yeah.
And then there are BIPOC community sings. And so there's a lot more happening, I think, that is providing spaces for brown and black folks to come together and heal and create solidarity.
More from the experiential aspect of it, or is it actually studies and when we talk about the world of hallucinogenics, right? Would you characterize that as a field that have been studied up this, or is it more experiential in its pathways and pathologies at this point?
So it's been studied. So there are a lot of studies that show that psychedelics, psilocybin, ketamine, there's a lot of studies that show that they actually treat and very often move people significantly forward who are experiencing PTSD, severe depression, things that have been treatment resistant, people who have been treatment resistant. So I've experienced treatment resistant PTSD and depression. And so things like talk therapy, therapies, while I think there's a lot of benefit to it, don't work for everybody. And so the studies have shown, they're still early, but the studies have shown that they can be really beneficial and they can actually move people beyond maintenance and into actual healing.
Gotcha.
So yeah, there's studies and it's experiential, right?
Right.
So I think that, those spaces that are being created are really important because there's something about healing collectively as communities. So for instance, at Cora Center, they have BIPOC-specific journeys, psilocybin journeys. And so it's not just healing your individual trauma, it's healing the trauma of your lineage. We all carry the trauma of our ancestors, and that's in our DNA.
Yeah.
And so to be in spaces with community where the experiences are distinct, but there's still similarities around depression, it's very powerful.
Wow. So, Sonja, are you familiar with the Balmer Institute and the work that they're trying to bring on board here in Oregon?
I don't think
At Oregon, the University of Oregon?
I don't think I've heard of that, no.
No, there is a real unique attempt going on by the University of Oregon in a collaboration with the Balmer Institute. And they bought the Concordia campus.
Okay.
And last year. And this year there will be 26 new students coming in with a specialized degree pathway, a 4-year degree, not a doctorate, it's not a master's, that allows for the ability to do intervention, community intervention, and be involved in school systems and stuff like that. And not to discount the programs that are already in the school systems at this point in time. But it's a real unique attempt at being able to address some of this trauma-oriented foundational work that you and I both know should have been addressed long ago, other than these significant pathways that they believe were significant. We still recognize where the shackle was, right? The shackle, but yet to address that shackle would only mean to admit something, right? Right. But I'm fascinated at the fact that they are beginning to allow this work to advance itself. And so much respect to the work you've done, the work that I've done over the last 50 years in looking at the plight of mental health and its development and how we begin to address trauma-oriented types of issues in our community. Much respect to you, sister, for the work that you've been doing up in Municipal. So, but I want to jump over to something more exciting. Well, I like this kind of conversation, too. This we could do all day.
We could, yeah.
But let's talk about the art.
Okay.
So how'd you leap? Where'd you go from? I mean, because I don't know about you. My caseload was to the degree to where I needed to jump off a bridge after 5 years. You know what I'm saying? If they brought me one more family, I was going to have an issue, you know? And then I needed an outlet, right? That idiosyncrasy kept showing up. And for me, fishing, hunting, and all that became my pathway.
Sure.
The reason why I originally came to Oregon, I mean, I remember driving up the I-5 headed to Canada to finish out my football career, right? And I'm going, man, that Oregon place was quite fascinating. And you know, but I felt for the first time that I've left the city. And I was driving north, and I'm going, man, this is some green places around here. I'm see all these trees and mountains and everything. Tell me, what made you or was art something you were always carrying with you?
I think it's always something I've carried with me. You know, I have experienced from a very young age. I experienced trauma, and so I think art for many years was a way to just navigate that, and it was an escape for me. And so I've always done something. I write music. I have taught myself to play a number of instruments, and then
musician too.
A little bit.
You and me got something. Got it. Go with your bad self. You know.
But as I got more into my healing journey, and I was very lucky to work with somebody who really brought in more indigenous practices and connection to, you know, the earth and the ocean and the ancestors. And that's where my artwork really started to take off. So I would write music related to my trauma, to experiences I've had to help get that out and move it through. Because what happens is it sits inside of us, and if we don't move it, then it just stays. Trauma lives in the body. So that's where I sort of started, and then I started doing ketamine. It was before psilocybin was legal. Ketamine was legal, which is also a psychedelic, and so I started doing that under doctor's care. And the second session of ketamine that I did, it was about a year anniversary from my mom's passing, and I really was like, I need to connect with her. And in that psilocybin session, the ancestors showed up, and she showed up very clearly. And I sat down with two of them, and they said, there are things you need to learn, and they were weaving. And so I went home and I bought a loom.
Wow.
And I started weaving.
Wow.
And so I've been weaving ever since. And very often what happens is I get messages I'm supposed to make something. And I don't know why. Usually at the time, it can connect afterwards. But what it is the ancestors telling me, these are the things you need to create to help you heal. And these are the things you need to create to help us heal as the line, right? Because when we heal, we don't just heal for ourselves. We heal for those who came before us.
Wow.
Right? Those who are coming after us.
Wow, what a statement. Yeah.
And so I've been weaving ever since. And most of the work is based on what needs to move through to heal both myself and my lineage, my ancestors.
So where's the philanthropy? Is the origin of the philanthropy with your art, is that part of the process also for you?
It just started, so I have never put my artwork out there. There are times where I will gift it to somebody if it feels like it's supposed to go to them, right? I can feel if something, this was meant to go to this person. But the reason that I sold it recently at this event for the first time, I put it out there. I said, I'm going to do it. I was really worried, like, people are going to think it's odd and weird and nobody's going to like. But it was really important to me because the Chorus Center, Psilocybin Center, the journeys that I had gone on with them, I did one journey and it was so powerful. And again, they do BIPOC specific journeys and they have a scholarship fund. And psilocybin journeys are very cost prohibitive. And it's because our insurance company and our medical care system doesn't want people to heal, right? So they're not going to cover it.
Hostage situation.
Yes. And so I know that the center feels very, very strongly about making it as accessible as possible for folks. And so I wanted to support that. And I wanted to see if I could, make some money and donate those funds.
Right on. And so is most of your artwork from the loom, weaving, and that kind of artwork, or is there other forms of artwork that you do outside of your music and weaving?
Yeah, I also do resin work. So I make resin tables, coasters, mugs, trays.
And do you do this in your spare time? Or
yeah, I kind of do. I always have about 3 or 4 projects going because it's just really, I'm driven to do it. And when I get this message, you're supposed to create something, I have to create it.
Yeah. Sister, this has been really, really fascinating. I'm sitting here, I'm looking at you, I'm smiling. I see a sister. I see somebody at the other end that reflects some of my very. Believe you me, it's not very often. It's an experience that, love and arriving to a place and a path of humility or humbleness to some degree, but at the same time experiencing the joy that can potentially manifest from a union or a meeting. And being available and actually being able to see it out here without having to style shift or anything like that. Just be available, it's like, okay, I'm receiving this. And this has been really wonderful for me. I don't know what it's been like for you. I mean, at the beginning you were a little bit uncomfortable, but now I'm going to ask you one last question.
Sure.
Now, usually when I do my podcast, and I'm usually got an agenda, and I don't have an agenda with you because you're an artist and a sister on it. And so when you look back at the conversation we've just had, and we've talked a little bit about the journey of mental health in our communities and transitioning to art, but usually when you think, before you get up from a table, you say to yourself, well, I wish they would have asked me this, or I wish I would have talked about this. Are you having any of these reflective kind of thoughts that maybe you might want to share with the audience at this point?
What's coming to me as you were asking that is people don't suffer in silence. It's really important, and I think for brown and black folks, we hold so much weight. We hold so many traumas. Right, and we're re-traumatized on a daily basis. I think particularly black and brown women, female-identifying folks. We carry our communities and our families on our backs and our shoulders, and we often suffer in silence, and that is so damaging and so dangerous. And so there are ways to heal. There are ways to connect with community, and we hurt in community and we heal in community. And so I encourage people to reach out and find those spaces and find those healing spaces, and not suffer in silence.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to tell you, that this is the episode of Black Beat that I've been looking for. I don't know about nobody else, sister, but this has been the episode of Black Beat I've been looking for. So, hey, y'all, if y'all ain't never experienced nothing like this, y'all got to find some way to address some of these things that shackle you to the earth. I mean, shackle you to those things that are hurting you, I should say, or creating difficulty for you. Those things that shackle you to those things. Look, I seriously believe that there is something out there for you to pursue to free yourself, free your mind, free your spirit, free your soul. you know. And I would hope that y'all would find this woman somewhere, that wherever she is. Sonja, would you like to give someone a way to be able to get a hold of you and your work, or is that a thing that you do? Or
I hadn't thought about it.
well, do you want people to contact you with your work and to pursue your work, or what are your thoughts about that?
You know, I think if folks wanted to see my work, I can send pictures of them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, folks can contact me through email. I can send pictures, and then I would donate the money to Chorus Center
How
for their
about,
scholarship
would you
fund.
like to share your email?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's SERVIN, so Ervin 522 @gmail.com.
Thank you.
And if folks would just let me know that it came through this route and that they're interested in looking at the art, knowing that the money will go to the scholarship fund at Chorus Center.
Sister, thank you very much. This has
Thank
been
you.
a really exciting episode of Black Beat Podcast for me. But hey, y'all, stay tuned. It's on its way. Some more of this. This ain't going to be her last time in this booth. So anyway, we appreciate y'all listening to this exciting episode of Sonja Ervin. It's just been wonderful, sister.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I really
yeah,
appreciate you
yeah.
giving me the opportunity.
Hey, we're out. You hear? All right.
Thanks.